First of all, a little bit about yourself, Chris. You are based at, what, the College of Health at Massey University, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, in Auckland.
So you're on the Massey University campus in Auckland. Is that the campus on the North Shore?
Technically, no, we're not on the campus. We're actually down in just up from the Auckland University campus in the central city.
Oh, right. Do you stray into the CBD occasionally, or is it too dangerous even for you?
Occasionally I go down get something for lunch or visit the library or something like that.
Oh, it's good to see a public service still going down there, Chris, because I see the IRD have pulled out. Listen, mate, I was introducing you before. I've read your background out to people. You are clearly well esteemed in this area and range of studies to do with drug use in New Zealand, etc.
Yep.
And you've also had a particular focus on methamphetamine. First of all, can I just go to methamphetamine as a general rule? When did we start noticing methamphetamine use in this country?
In the late 1990s, very late 1990s, early 2000s. So I actually came back. I was working in the UK. I came back to New Zealand then, and I was expecting to find, as I'd left it, cannabis, LSD, and a little bit of morphine. But then I started getting a whole lot of really interesting calls about this new thing called methamphetamine, or P, or pure, what it used to be called back then.
And where did it come from initially? Why did it come to New Zealand?
Well, actually, like a lot of drugs, it started off in a very small subgroup of the population here in New Zealand. So gangs, a lot of gangs with international collaborate with networks with the US, where outlaw motorcycle gangs used to use methamphetamine, and they used to make it on a very small scale. But then there was a kind of change in the wider preferences for drug use, more we now call party drugs, which include, ecstasy, and methamphetamine started to turn up then, along with those kind of groups of drugs.
Right. And so they were mostly, because as you say, New Zealand was a bit of a cannabis capital in the 90s, so were they retailed by the same drug sellers, methamphetamine? What was the advantages to methamphetamine that, they were retailed as an alternative drug source or as an adjunct drug source?
Well, I think the gangs historically always had the recipe for methamphetamine, and they used it within their own subculture. But as that party scene started to expand into the mainstream of, dance parties and stuff, I think they began to see that this had a wider appeal, and they could sell it as kind of a party drug, and then it just kind of went from there.
Right. Now, New Zealand has an unenviable reputation as per capita being an incredibly wide user of methamphetamine. Why, and who are the people that primarily use it?
Well, that's a really good question, and the answer's a little bit complicated. So, one thing to note about New Zealand is it does regularly come very high up in the rankings of methamphetamine use globally. So sometimes, number 2, number 3. But on the other hand, we have almost no cocaine use, or we have a little bit, but nothing on the scale of most countries. And our heroin use is also very low. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think methamphetamine appealed in New Zealand because initially it could be made locally, so there was a good, reliable supply around the country, and it could also be smoked. So in New Zealand there's always been a tradition of smoking and an aversion to injecting intravenous use. Yeah. So it kind of appealed, and also I think it kind of appealed to the culture in New Zealand of as not so much getting out of it and not being able to do anything, but actually getting out there and being quite productive and, in a more darker way, aggressive and assertive, rather than the kind of heroin kind of approach.
Drippy experience, So you go into some sort of a fugue. Okay, so so methamphetamine, as you say, is used by people who are still able to be productive. And then there was suggestion that, I don't know, certain industries, the truck driving industry, for example, meat workers and on the chains, those sorts of people were indulging in it. Is that a fair characterisation, or is the use much wider than that?
Yeah, that's true. So it was, it may well have been again used within things like transport and truck driving for a long time because you can stay awake. But it also broadened into other professions, like and this was the trap and the appeal, kind of the cross-section appeal of methamphetamine. Is it was also used by lawyers and doctors and quite high-end professionals. So. And that is really partly why there was this demand for a response. Was suddenly you honestly got people who are living quite comfortable lives in Epsom and Parnell finding their sons and daughters having problems with this drug.
I mean, I've never taken methamphetamine, so I'm not, I guess. Mind you, I haven't committed suicide either, but I haven't, so I'm not immediately able to say this is a good thing or a bad thing at all. Is it? But and the sort of public image of methamphetamine is ambivalent. On the one hand, you talk about it being a party drug and stuff like that, and people can use it to prolong their sort of working life during a day. On the other hand, you see the kind of people that turn up in front of our courts, and you read stories about the addiction of methamphetamine. Is it a particularly addictive drug? And when you answer that question, could you answer the second one, which is it particularly bad for you?
I would answer yes. I think methamphetamine is a very powerful psychostimulant, so and it has quite a high addictive potential. So maybe not as high as some of the opioids, but very close. And basically, the intoxication is often, overwhelms people, and that can happen quite quickly. So, there's plenty of people with great, as I was just referred to earlier, with great careers and backgrounds and seemingly strong willpower who have succumbed to methamphetamine use and a dependency. And this was actually the part of the story of methamphetamine in New Zealand, is there's a number of tragic stories of people that were, very successful in their private lives and their careers, in the community, and their downfall was methamphetamine.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, because it seems to me, through a bit of personal experience, I'm afraid, that there are people who have an addictive personality and get addicted, and alcohol's a good example. And then there are people who can partake of alcohol and not be addicted, and everything's fine. Is that true of methamphetamine too?
It's true to some extent, but it's a very complicated story. So, and I think it's a matter of understanding addiction, which we're still trying to understand completely. And it seems to me there is some substances that are very addictive, no matter how strong willpower you think you've got or how together you are. And opioids is a prime example of that. It can really control people, and I put methamphetamine into that basket as well. And addiction is about the substance, how powerful that substance is. It's also about personality, of course, and but it's more than just saying, well, I've got an addictive personality, because life's full of ups and downs, traumas, disappointments, and it's not necessarily you've got addictive personality, but hard drugs can come to fill that gap or that emptiness that you have inside you. And that kind of situation's not just a matter of looking at someone and say, oh, they've got an addictive personality. Is trauma can happen to people, and naturally we sometimes turn to alcohol and other drugs to kind of help address that hurt. And, you know, you can extend that out to a whole lot of different behaviours and outcomes in your life. So, you know, the same with alcohol and tobacco is the reason we use those things is they make us feel better. Or they get us through the day. And with methamphetamine, it's a similar story.
Yes, except, and here's the except bit. Methamphetamine use, you'd be much better empirically based to make this judgment than I, seems to be either at a plateau or rising. I haven't noticed any wastewater measurements that suggest that methamphetamine use is on the decrease in this country. Given all the things that you've just said to me, and that seems to be the public health image as well, and an awareness that this is not a good drug to introduce yourself to for all the reasons that you've outlined, why do people decide to enter into the illicit market if they've got, for example, some form of trauma to deal with, when there are plenty of legal drugs that you can get through your GP and the health system in general?
Well, often it's simply that the experience is much more intense.